Hi, I'm Phil Nuzzo. I'm Artistic Director of Brooklyn Metro Chamber Orchestra. Our next concert is Saturday night, May 18th at the Brooklyn Academy of Music Fisherman Space and is dedicated to the work of women composers. I'm here with Hannah Selin, who is in our viola section and has played with us for 3 seasons now. So I promise not to make any viola jokes today, okay?
All right.
Okay, but at what point in time were you sitting in the viola section somewhere decide, I think I want to compose?
It was while I was an undergraduate at Oberlin. So I was kind of surrounded by creative people. There's a very open atmosphere there, and I kind of drifted away from the practice room at certain points to work on my own projects. And I also took some electronic music classes there that started me on that trajectory, but it took years during and after my time at Oberlin for me to identify as a composer.
So you have a 3-pronged musical career. You're viola playing, you're composing, and you're indie band. How do these 3 interplay with your composition?
There's a lot of connectivity between the band, the classical viola playing, and composing, and I really try to keep them all going. There have been many points where I was frustrated and I thought, okay, I need to just cut out one of these things, and it's not going to be composing. And then I always come around and say, no, it's too important for me to have the sound of real instruments around me and to be making sound myself. That is integral for me as a composer. And singing and writing songs helps me be more concise as a composer. It helps me develop rhythmic integrity, and the really great musicians I play with in the band that I have help my sense of harmony as well, and voicing chords, and yeah.
So now let's talk about the piece. 6 narratives. This is from writing songs and musique concrète to this piece is a big jump. It's interestingly scored for a small orchestra, yet with enough salt and pepper with harp and tuned percussion, etc. And all-women vocal sextet who sing background and sing solo. What brought you to, first, these poems, and second, this style of composing it?
So in choosing the instrumentation, I was very much influenced by the text, and it took me a very long time to even find the poems that I wanted to compose this song cycle on. It was a couple years ago, about two and a half years ago, that I started looking for text, and I knew that I wanted to use text by a female poet. So I checked out lots of books from the library and was reading poetry for many months. And I was between Audre Lorde and Adrienne Rich, and then when I found this particular series of poems, 6 narratives, I was completely sold immediately on reading them, and I knew I was going to write the piece on those 6 poems that are written together as a collection, so they really lend themselves perfectly to this song cycle. And then something that spurred and inspired the instrumentation was this end note at the end of the book of poetry that 6 Narratives was originally published in. Adrienne Rich includes an end note that kind of changes the whole meaning and context of the poems, which I didn't realize when I first read them. So after getting to know the poems for a while, I then realized there was this end note that specifies that each poem is told by a different voice, and I had assumed they were all the same person with different vignettes from their life. And in fact, it's all different people, which kind of gives it this feeling of like a simultaneous simultaneous lives unfolding and somehow being completely connected, maybe without the individuals realizing it. And there's also this kind of interplay between the personal and the political, and it's a very deep and inspiring text. So that's from that I came up with the idea to use 6 different singers who would then rotate to form a chorus of 5 with a featured soloist, a different soloist featured in each movement. And that from there I came up with the rest of the instrumentation, and it kind of just unfolded from that point.
You must be very excited to have one of your works, your first extended work, performed by your local professional orchestra. It must be very exciting. What women composers inspired you in the past?
I am very excited and very appreciative that you and the Brooklyn Metro Chamber Orchestra have decided to premiere this piece. It's a really amazing opportunity for me, so thank you. Female composers who've inspired me lately, for a while, my favorite composer has been Kaija Saariaho, a Finnish composer. She's living. She had her opera L'amour de loin was performed by the Met a couple years ago, and I went to see it, and it was right around the time I had just chosen the text for this piece, but I hadn't really started composing. So that piece had a huge impact on me as I was conceptualizing this piece in the very beginning. And I haven't revisited that. I haven't actually seen the score for it, but the sound and the effects that she used and the way she played around with all of the different dimensions on stage with the chorus and the soloists stuck with me, and I think had a strong impact on 6 narratives. And another female composer who was really important in my earlier formation was Pauline Oliveros and her deep listening philosophy. So as an undergraduate, I was part of this improvising, all women's improvising ensemble called WHAM, Women and Art Music, that was based in Oberlin. It was an Oberlin student club, basically, run by Julia Christensen, who's a professor there. And that experience, I participated for a few years on and off in WHAM, and we did a lot of Pauline Oliveros deep listening pieces, as well as other Fluxus performance pieces together. And the freedom that I felt there to improvise and make any sounds I wanted with percussion or vocally or viola, and the collaborative element was a big influence on me. So
May 18th will come and go. 6 narratives will be a success. What's next?
yeah, I have been really looking forward to the next bigger composition that I do after 6 narratives, because it's been kind of all consuming, and I'm still working on the piano reduction, which is almost done. So the next thing on the table I've been thinking about since this fall, when my father had a nearly fatal accident and kind of miraculously has recovered. He had a traumatic head injury and was almost paralyzed, but narrowly escaped that and is now doing fine. So I'm gonna write a string quartet. It will be my first string quartet. I've kind of been saving this for a long time, because as a string player, it's kind of like candy to write a string quartet. So I'm really excited about it. It's going to kind of follow his progress from the time he had this fall and cracked his head open to when he started recovering through a bunch of surgeries, brain surgeries, unconsciousness, being extremely drugged and not really knowing where he was, and hallucinating, and finally recovering from that and reconnecting with himself and rediscovering life. So I've been kind of sketching that, mostly graphic. I do a lot of graphic scores when I'm first imagining a piece, so I'll draw and kind of come up with the form by sketching visually in space. My dad, when he was hallucinating, I played part of Bach's Third Cello Suite for him in the hospital room, and he told me, he said he enjoyed it, but I could barely understand him because he had like a neck brace on. He told me that he was enjoying it, but he just couldn't deal with the sound. So I stopped, and then he, a little while later, was like, "Were you playing, was that Bolero?" And I was like, "No, it was Bach." But we had a conversation after that about Bolero, as well as the 80s movie Bolero, which I haven't seen, but the plot sounds really cheesy. So there's this confusion between the music Bolero and the movie Bolero, and the actress Bo Derek in that
was 10.
movie.
The name of the movie was 10.
It was 10,
Yes.
but it's based on. Okay. Anyhow, all of that aside, the movie probably will not come into play in the string quartet, but Bolero, the piece, I'm planning to somehow structurally wind that into the framework of the piece in various ways. And what's interesting about Bolero, and Ravel, about Ravel really, is that he had a traumatic head injury near the end of his life and then died of a brain surgery that had complications. So this all kind of like slapped me in the face when I was reading about it recently, and the weird connection between my dad thinking he heard Bolero in the hospital bed to Ravel's similar experience.
When you came to Ms. Rich's poetry, explain to me how the imagery in the poetry was able to be translated into sound in your work.
Each movement and each poem in the series has its own setting, and there are common threads that link them, but each one is kind of unique. And so as I composed the piece, I really sat for a long time with each poem and with the whole thing, and kind of absorbed and built the world, the imagery of that poem up in my mind, and obviously using my own memories and kind of feelings of different places I've been, dream-like sequences plus natural imagery. There's a lot of, so in the first movement, there's a lot of water references to the sea, kind of expansive natural landscapes. And it seems like it's set on the West Coast, although I'm not sure. So in my mind, that first poem, there's a lot of, you'll hear in the music that there's a lot of moving, a lot of kind of flowing motifs, watery sounds. The way the voices work together is often kind of like burbling or oscillating in a fluid way, especially with the ensemble that is kind of reflecting the soloist and forming like a pool for her to sing over, a pool of sound. And then later on, the second movement is very urban. It's set in Brooklyn. It actually has references to Sheepshead Bay, and also, I guess not just Brooklyn, but also Queens. LaGuardia shows up as well. And so there's a lot of mechanical sounds in the second movement, and kind of, repetitive, city, noisy, sometimes unpleasant, cacophonous sounds, a lot of change, constant change. The third movement is kind of a new age soliloquy, and in my mind, the third poem is about um, kind of like a jaded hippie who retreats from society and somehow meets their demise. So the music has a lot of, it emulates, the orchestra is emulating a synthesizer a lot of the time, and kind of building on this very static harmony, and in a way, it's intentionally new age sounding.
Well, thank you, Hannah, for entertaining these questions. And we look forward to the world premiere of your piece on May 18th, again at the Fishman Space, Brooklyn Academy of Music. And thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Maestro Nuzzo, and thanks to the Brooklyn Metro Chamber Orchestra.